All right, welcome back to the Godfo Universe podcast. It's Dan and Josh, co-creators of the Godfo Universe and all respective properties therein and without, forever unto eternity and ever.
Until death do us part.
So help us God. Um, Today we've got Steven with us, who is awesome and his voice sounds better than ours. So y'all just got to get used to hearing people with a better voice.
Um, Hi, everyone.
It's like smooth jazz.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm here to take you on a journey. Join me.
It's like if
Join me as we travel together.
it's like if it's like if Prince were still alive and a fully white guy. Anyway, so today we're gonna get super pretentious and discuss something
Yeah.
a term that Josh and I have been throwing around a lot, whether out of ignorance or arrogance. One, anti-humanism and its rise in art and culture recently. So I'll give a little preface of it. Uh, there's a whole philosophical view of humanism. I'm not trying to argue that because I'm not a humanist and I think their ideas are pretty terrible. But anti-humanism, as I'm using it, and Josh and I've been using it to classify it, is the replacement or degradation of humans and human beings and human spirit. And the best way that I can think to sum it up right now is comparing Tolkien to a lot of what's happening in our world and art. Particularly, I keep thinking of the scene where Theoden reclaims his sword. Gandalf makes the comment, at least in the movie, that like your hands might remember their strength if they grasp the sword.
Mm.
And how in Lord of the Rings, humankind as a race is perpetually told and encouraged to be what they can be, you know, and and to realize that and to do it within themselves for the betterment of the entire world, kind of like an Arthurian legend. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Well,
yeah,
and the humanist mind point or worldview is that idea that all people are free to give meaning to their own lives, and they can do that with independent thought, creativity, whatever
mm,
they produce gives their life meaning. This idea of anti-humanism is, initially was a response to that or a rebuttal of that,
and it
and it's
grew.
actually,
Yeah,
yeah, and it's really now it's more of a, I see it almost as a destruction of identity.
yeah, destruction of human in general and human spirit and all that therein with like it accepts the humanist proposition basically that God is man made because humanism basically tried to get rid of divinity. That's if we get down to it, that's what it is. And anti-humanism basically accepts that premise. So okay, well we'll destroy man as well.
So
That's a
we're
good
just going to
idea.
destroy everything that's real and matters in life.
Yeah,
Everything that gives life any kind of meaning at all. We're just going to get rid of it.
well that what you just said is real because like Josh and I went over that a little bit with like simulacra and basically how there's just growing trend in art, media, and just the real world where it's the real world is trying to push people into a simulated world. Everything from metaverse to ideologies to just to everything you're surrounded by, like to the news itself. You know.
Mm.
Uh,
So
yeah, go ahead.
I'm making some notes here just to make sure I'm on the right track here. So humanism being, all people are free to give meaning to their own lives is what I heard. And then anti-humanism, in Dan, in your definition, was in some sense the degradation of the human spirit. So we're kind of attacking it from the other angle this time.
Yeah, it's anti-humanism. It's basically a critical theory not only of humanism but just basically of human being and the idea a lot of these philosophical terms basically go back further and further and further, and they're really simple and they're really they're they're just they use academic phrases to obfuscate basic things they believe, and it's just, I would just say, degradation of the human, of everything that exists, because that's where a lot of critical theory comes from in general. It's
Well, and the way we see that play out, and we see a lot of that in our society right now, but it's that idea of demonizing anyone who stands out, demonizing anyone who says, okay, you know, maybe the way that you're thinking isn't right. Maybe there's another way to think. Well, then that becomes a an assault on their ideology. So they want to crush you because you're thinking like an individual. How dare you think outside of this box that we're trying to put you in? It's very problematic, and it leads to a lot of bad things. It always has.
Oh my goodness. In a society where people aren't allowed to actually think for themselves, it could be very dangerous. I mean, there's nothing better than allowing people to actually think, because I think Dan and I were talking about this last time. The true things tend to come to the surface. And it's like, in a society like that, I can actually discern or have a discourse about it, or work out what is actually true and what's actually real, and what makes the most sense for you to live your life based on,
mm-hmm.
in a society where you can actually have that type of communication. So if that's not possible, then now you're just being controlled.
Well,
if you look at it, go ahead, Dan.
It all stems, like a lot of this stuff stems from a denial of objective truth. And like I said, I'm not trying to get too much into like the technical side of the philosophies, because the philosophies can't agree with themselves, and the more they branch out. It's worse than church denominations, because there's not even a singular source that you can go to and argue from. And that's the problem. Is it's the idea you keep hearing and seeing of everything's a social construct. And it's like, well, okay, well, first of all, what's wrong with a social construct? And second, no, not everything is. Some things are undeniably, objectively true, And
well, I saw a great little clip of a speech that Dave Chappelle was given recently, and he was saying that, like, there's this big problem with the destruction of ethics now. He said, where it used to be that we recognize as a society, we recognize that there was good and there was bad, but now what everybody's wanting you to think is there's no such thing as good and bad. There's just better or worse.
Yeah, that's a political framing.
Right, and he's like, if you can get people to think in terms of better or worse instead of good and bad, well, then those people are easier to control, because it's a rat that's in a maze,
mm-hmm.
and if they believe that better or worse mentality, that the rat gets the cheese, but the one that believes in good and bad, that's the rat that realizes it's inside of a maze.
Yeah. Objective good,
and
objective
I really like that
evil.
way. Objective. And see, I think that if you want to know what's actually true, or at least start moving in the direction of what's actually true, it's usually going to be the thing that the media and the different talking heads are the most afraid of, or the most angry by. The thing they rail against the most is usually the thing that turns out to have been true.
Yeah, and truth usually isn't complicated. Solutions are complicated. Trying to solve problems, but usually truth is pretty simple. And to sum all this up, to get us like off of the philosophical, like it's what I'm discussing, and what Josh and I have been using this term, is basically the denial of a human nature as anti-human.
Yeah.
And where I guess I've seen this recently is even in The Last Jedi. Basically anything Rian Johnson writes, and I hate to keep throwing that guy under the bus, even though I love to, but
it's fun to do.
Well, he's like a lot of writers nowadays. They don't write people; they write characters that they just made up, and that's not how people actually are. To me, that's a type of anti-humanism, because it's a lie. It's saying that this is how people are, and that's not how people are. And like another one is, we see it. It's always like science is a solution to man. Like man needs to advance. Man needs to become more than man. And I know that gets into post-humanism, and to me, I don't care. To me, it's all the same crap, because it all comes from that same base of denying human nature and then also denying an objective truth, therefore denying God. And that goes all the way back to Hegel and Marx and all that kind of. All those guys had the same this view of a denial of human nature, basically, or a degradation of it. You know what I mean? And
we're just chemicals. We're just evolutionary impulses. We're not actually.
We're the result of our
beings.
Societal norms and constraints.
Right.
So it's like, well, then what made those societal norms and constraints? Why did that happen? Why does this pattern emerge? Like, even if we get into like gender stuff, it's like, well, what is gender? Well, gender is an aspect of sex. Well, like, why is that? Why did these roles happen? Why did this happen? Oh, because of sex. Well, what is sex? Well, it's these traits that just happen to be found in nature, and it springs from there.
I think what's sad about all of this is like I have this tendency as well, and so it's an indictment on me, but we have the tendency to go with what the masses think because, for me, I'm the type of person that wants to fit in. And so like if somebody says that something is true, it's like, well, I guess I'll believe them. It's really hard to like stand up for what's actually true in the face of, an overwhelming army of people that believe something different. And the reality is, if you can get away from that and you can just open your eyes and look around and trust your eyes, trust what you actually see. I mean, truth being something that actually corresponds to reality, then it will set you free. You don't have to be trapped in that.
Well, the question is always like, then like, well, what is reality? And it's like, is it what I see? Is it what you see? You see what I'm saying? And it's like,
right.
If you like,
that's circular. I mean, that's always going to be a circular argument.
Well, it's like the blind guy has to trust.
You have to appeal to something.
The blind guy has to trust you that the sun exists. Like, to him it doesn't in some way. I'm sure he could feel it on his skin, but you know what I mean. It's like, at what point do you stop breaking down things and trying to divide and degrade and destroy things and accept that there must be some kind of acceptable reality to start from, otherwise you can't build anything. But that's the whole point, is too many people in our society are driven by an idea of not to create but to destroy. And I know I'm being really vague with it just because it's I'm seeing pieces of it, and Josh and I use it in pieces because it hasn't fully established itself as a zeitgeist yet in our culture. You know what I mean? Thank God it did in like the Soviet Union and in Mao's China. That's what it always does. It always becomes this thing of beating down, trying to expose that the human spirit isn't real and the human nature isn't real and that people can be controlled. And that's what totalitarianism is, It's to show that a human being is just a cog in a machine.
I think Josh said it earlier. Oh, go ahead.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Josh was saying this earlier that, that's if all we are is made from some kind of primordial soup, or we're just chemicals, or we're, all these things, it really takes away from any kind of like value and worth that a person has. And I think you were mentioning this earlier, and I'm obviously going to like throw my Christian card on my sleeve here again.
Yeah, we're all believers here.
But I mean, my worldview is that the enemy is causing all of this, like the degradation of the human spirit in some way, like a denial of objective truth, is a scheme from the enemy. He wants to destroy us. He doesn't want the human spirit, the human nature, to be something that is valued in any way, because inherently we have God written on us. We have His image on us.
It's graffiti on the image of God. It's spray painting over, the beauty of how we reflect our Creator. He hates that. And when you think about it as a society, and everything I agree that everything in the past few years has been about subversion. And you see it in fiction, you see it in. And it's something. It's not new. It started back. I mean, we go through this cycle, like Dan said, but like, I love Westerns. I'm a big fan of Westerns. If you take a Western from like the 30s, 40s, the cowboys and all those characters, they're represented as these ideals of good.
Yeah.
Right? They're heroic, they're noble, they're kind. they're wise. And then you hit the 60s, 70s, and all of a sudden, all the movies about anything, any kind of Western has to be a revisionist Western.
A
And it's all
deconstructed
about, well, look,
Western.
right, it's got to be about, well, look how backwards and racist and hateful these people were, and they're not allowed to be heroic anymore. Let's destroy the image of
Mm-hmm.
this archetype. And it's the same thing that happened in the 90s with comic books. The anti-heroes, and Dan and I, we talked about this in the villainy episode. Characters like the Punisher and different ones that were so popular, but really that was just taking the nobility out of the hero.
Mm-hmm. Bringing them down to our
And then
level, to
say,
quote
well,
the Joker.
yeah, let's make them down. Let's get them down in the mud with us so that they don't stand as ideals anymore. And I'll be perfectly honest. Dan and I are huge fans of the Zack Snyder
Justice League.
Justice
Yeah.
League and all of that. I think that's the biggest reason why they hate Henry Cavill's Superman so much. Is here's somebody that represents an ideal.
Mm-hmm.
Let's deconstruct that. Let's bring you down. They don't want to let an ideal symbol exist anymore.
Why do you guys think that is? I mean, why do you think that's happening?
Well, I think you hit it on the head. I mean, I think, and for our non-Christian listeners, I mean, think of it just remember it's like the nothing from Never-Ending Story, or just basically an acidic or corrosive cloud, or just call it resistance, like Stephen King does. It's just, if there's anything that is or exists, especially if it's good, something is always trying to corrode it and kill it and destroy it. Now, I think what we're seeing more in America, maybe in the West, is more of a Marxist and communist idea, or neo-Marxist idea of subversion, of trying to destroy a society from inside and out, because Marxism is predicated on the fact that there cannot be a human nature, and everything that exists deserves to perish. This is exactly what he wrote down, quoting not Dante, Faust. And I think we're seeing manifestation,
including himself in the book that he wrote.
Yeah.
Hope, wish, you wish. But I mean, of course, that predates that. And Josh and I talked about dialectical inversion, and these are all just fancy words, but to basically mean like take power away. Basically, you're Satan and you want to be God. You don't want to have to change. You want to prove that everything's as awful as you are, because if everything's as awful as you are and you're the worst, then you should be running everything.
Well, see, I think on an individual level, and probably on a societal level too, I think this metaphor works fine too. But I think when you see an ideal, an archetype, a heroic ideal, or a positive role model, a positive image, it acts like a mirror. And people look into that and they see their own lack of
Inadequacies.
whatever. Yeah, they see their own inadequacies, and instead of responding by saying, I should strive to be better, they say, I should break this mirror. And it's that idea, like, it's the same reason why people who maybe they're poor will look at somebody who is wealthy, and one person will look at that and say, I want to be like him, and they will work harder and they will study harder and they will go through the difficult times to better themselves, and one day they become an ideal too. Or they can just throw rocks at this guy and try to try to throw as much mud on him as possible to make everybody hate him and try to take away what he has so that they can have it or no one can. And I think the goal of most people in society now is, it's not, we talk about equality, but it's not equality. What they really want to do is cast down what they see as the ideal. Anybody who stands out as having anything virtuous about them, they want to destroy the image of that person rather than try to be better.
It's Cain versus Abel.
Yeah, exactly. It's that whole, why is your face so downcast? If you had just done what I required of you.
Yeah, if you had done what he did.
If you just obeyed. Yeah, if you just followed the example.
Well, it's interesting that you guys would bring this up because one of the things that you're talking earlier about The Last Jedi, which we can probably pick that apart and have fun with that.
I would love to.
Um, but one of the things that initially I felt so wrong when I left the movie theater was like, what do they do to Luke Skywalker?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
what do they do to my favorite character? And I was trying to like identify like why is he my favorite character? Like, why am I so upset about this? You know? And I realize it's because he is like a good archetype. Like, yeah, he's not perfect, but he represents something that's good. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
objections that I heard, someone that actually liked the film said that they liked these characters because there was a lot of gray in them. It's like you couldn't tell if they were good or bad. And it's like they were
Mm-hmm.
really content to just look at things the way they were. And Josh, like you were saying, that they're not. They were looking at things the way they were, and they didn't want to change at all. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I don't care about the good. I don't care about the bad. I just want to see things the way they are. And there's some merit to like seeing the world the way it is, but not striving for better. I think is a huge, huge mistake. And these kind of, you mentioned westerns earlier too, having these archetypes of what's good and bad. I mean, how are you supposed to teach your kid to be any kind of upstanding person in society, like without any kind of responsibilities or any appeal to what's good? It's like, how do you think your kids are going to turn out when you start teaching them these crazy philosophies? Like, how's this supposed to play out in real life? Well, it's not going to play out very well. And, I could see why you guys are so upset about it. I think I understand a little better now.
Well, hopefully that generation rejects these ideas. Hopefully
I'll be
they
right back.
don't have a taste for it and they reject it. That's what happens a lot of times throughout like history is that you have these ideas that rise up and after a certain point of time you have a generation that looks at it and says that there's got to be more to life than this. There has to be more to me than what they want me to think there is. And then they start crashing against it and hopefully eventually tear that wall down or destroy those ideas because they're not glorifying anything and everybody wants to. I think within all of us there's at least some spark that wants to bring glory or claim glory of some sort.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's really optimistic. And I think we have reason for optimism if we believe what we say we believe. We have reason for optimism in that there is ultimate good, and that good is not just a faceless, void or an idea that we're talking about. The ultimate good. Well, we believe the ultimate good is actually a person,
Yeah.
and that he loves us and cares for us and made this entire world, including us. And so we have hope, And I'm like you, Josh. I'm very optimistic. I think that good ideas, true ideas, are the ones that tend to last. The lies only last
Mm-hmm.
for so long.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing is lies don't exist as themselves. They just exist in opposition to truth. They're shadows of it. They're trying to cover it up.
Mm.
Let's see, and to look at it from and we talk a lot about nerdy stuff, but when we look at the stories that stand the test of time, those hero journey type stories, a lot of times your characters like Aragorn, or he goes through that period where he doesn't want to accept that he is the ideal.
Mm.
He doesn't, but eventually he steps into the responsibility of being more than himself. And
I
he
th-
becomes that king, he becomes that ideal that everyone needed him to be, and then they rally behind him and darkness is destroyed. It's the oldest story in the world, but it's always the true story. It's the little shepherd boy at the side of the battlefield that says, "You know what? I'm gonna walk out there and I'm gonna kill that giant.
Yeah, I've killed lions
mm.
before.
I've killed the lion, I've killed the bear. I can take this dude down."
Well, even as you share that, like the hair on my arm is standing up because, I think it's just within human beings to think, I can do something about this. I can defeat
Hmm.
that evil, and I should do something about this. There's an oughtness to it. It's like there's a purposeness to it. Like there's something behind it that's really deep within us within human beings that we think that we have to rally against this. We need to fight against this. And that's why those stories are so good. That's why they make such
Well,
compelling stories because they resonate. They're true.
well, I mean, look what happens after David kills the giant. The entire army of Israel is mobilized,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when the real victory happens. Is after the giant's killed. But it took somebody stepping out and actually stepping to it and standing against the thing that looked big and scary, and then others followed suit. Other people rallied behind.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually a young person that does it. It's usually that younger generation that isn't so hardened and cynical that stands up and says, I don't know what all of your guys' problem is. Did you hear what this guy said? He's not telling the truth.
Yeah,
Mm.
the what we just got into a lot of. I actually did a kind of a rambling stream yesterday that will come out sometime. It might come out after this, but it doesn't matter. About the differences between Anakin, Luke, and Rey, particularly with like how fatherhood worked for all of them.
Mm.
And I came to the conclusion. I'm not trying to go over it, but I'm glad you guys are here because I wanted to get it out so I could talk with you guys about it. Going with all this, Rey, as I would define it, is a very anti-human character. Like she is the offspring of a clone, so she's already separated from humanity. And not only that, but she doesn't know her family at all. Her grandfather, who is the progenitor, who is the one who made the clone, is evil. So she has no lineage. And then instead of turning that into she'll become herself and start a new lineage, that doesn't even happen. She adopts Luke Skywalker's, who she's like a parasite. She's not even like a human as a character goes. You see what I'm saying? She she doesn't follow any story really at all. She just kind of exists because she was made, and it's not even evil was destroyed by its own hubris, like, Palpatine made a mistake or something and made something good. It's that evil, using science and magic, these kind of Gnostic ideas, created a golem that was possessed by the Jedi to kill him. You see what I'm saying?
Well, and the argument could even be made that they never had any idea
Yeah, and
what
yeah,
she was or who she was.
but
There was no identity in
yeah,
mind
I'm
when they
not saying.
created a
Yeah, I'm not
character.
saying the movie. I'm not saying they did that on purpose. I'm just
No, I
saying
agree with you. No,
that's
I
the
see what you're
result. Yeah,
meaning.
that's what the movie gives us: is this non-person who's not good, not bad. In fact, she's never tempted by the dark side ever. She's never corrupted, but she's never good. She's just this non-thing. But that is the essence of the anti-humanist idea, or the new socialist man, is that people have no lineage and they go nowhere except for what you fill in them. They're empty vessels. You see what I'm saying? As opposed to Luke, as opposed to Anakin, as opposed to Aragorn, particularly Aragorn, who had a lineage that he had to fulfill to restore the entire land to goodness.
Well, I see with the newer Star Wars movies too. I feel like if they had really wanted to do something right, they would have taken John Boyega's Finn character. The idea of a stormtrooper walking away from that life
Mm-hmm.
and learning to be something more. If he had become a Jedi, that would have been a much stronger story, and not because he's male and raised female or anything like that. Just because there would have been a real motivation behind it.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been a more human story. Instead, they took him from the decision to just kind of accidentally become not a stormtrooper anymore. Yeah, and then he just becomes sort of a bumbling
Well, yeah,
half hero
he's kind
to
of
a
an empty vessel too. That's what's weird.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, honestly, a lot of those that are writing these stories
I'll be right
that
back.
turn out this way are empty vessels themselves. And I think, when you're an empty vessel yourself, that's the kind of story that you write. We tend to write from our own sort of experiences. If you have nothing to really live for, or you're promoting all these, godless agendas, if
Yeah.
you have nothing to really keep you anchored. But actually, Dan explaining that was pretty cool because I didn't know why. It's not like I dislike the Ray character. I like aspects about the Ray character, but I just can't get on board with her in like a long term sense. Like, I don't have
Yeah.
any kind of like emotional feeling about her character, and I think that's at least part of the explanation.
Yeah. And it's just there's such a cynical worldview anymore in every aspect of our world.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is cynical now. And I get it. Like, I understand that things aren't good, that the economy's not good, that there's so
But
much garbage happening all
part of
around
the
us.
reasons we got there is because people believed the very cynical ideas that you're saying that this perpetuates.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
becomes it's the big snowball that just keeps getting bigger and bigger
I
and
don't think
rolling
enough.
downhill.
I don't think enough people ask the question why. It's just sometimes we just kind of go along and we drift in our life, and we just, we kind of glom on to any and everything that is fine. Well, whatever's, if this lifestyle's fine for you, or this type of story's fine for you, or whatever, we just kind of like grab onto it. But I wish we were more thoughtful about things because,
It's
there are some
easier to
things that
be
matter.
it's easier to be the hive mind and let someone else tell you what to think.
It's safer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easier, it's safer. It doesn't require you to do any sort of research for yourself. It doesn't require you to look deeply into yourself and say, "Oh, I might wonder if there's something wrong in me." And meanwhile, you point out all of the flaws and everything and everyone else, and you're not willing to look inside. That's problematic in itself.
Mm.
Yeah,
How can you know yourself
I
if you never gaze into yourself?
when I forget his name too, but it's like the main character at the end of Brave New World basically is
Mm.
fighting for his right to suffer because he's in
Yeah,
like a pillowy utopia where as long as you do like what you're told, everything's great. It's not even that it's fine; it's that it's great. And like that, I mean, I'm not trying to go into because there's the whole conspiracy theory debate is all weird stuff, but like people like it's okay to like you just said to do your own research. You can be wrong. There is
yeah,
nothing
of course you
wrong
can.
with making a
But
mistake. I mean that
prove me wrong.
and there's nothing wrong with being wrong. It's like yeah, prove me wrong, but it's like that's literally what science is, or the scientific method is. You test something to see if it's and you fail and you fail and you fail. Now there's a difference between being wrong and figuring stuff out and hate speech and stochastic terrorism, and because of the world
Yeah,
we
of
live in,
course.
people try to correlate those two, but it's like no man, like you need to think for yourself, and that doesn't mean you don't
Mhm.
believe anything. It just means like you take in everything you can and you filter it, and you notice what's happening. Pattern recognition, like you need prejudices. Like you are supposed to, if you're going to survive in nature, build up prejudices, which are ideas based on past experience, to where you can look at a like purple and yellow flower and it may or may not be poisonous, but it's like, well, 90% of the time I've seen those flowers, they were poisonous. So I move on. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what we see every time this anti-humanist mindset, and you can call it whatever ideology you want, but every time it starts to rise, with it comes the rise of censorship.
Mm-hmm.
With it comes the rise of telling people, no, you can't say that. If you say that, we're gonna
Because
take away your voice
because
because
it
you're not allowed to say
presupposes people are empty vessels and therefore have to be
exactly.
infantilized and protected but from their own thoughts, even though their thoughts come from an external society and they didn't come up with. You see what I'm saying? It's
Yep.
I didn't mean to interrupt you,
Surely
but yeah.
they Yeah, surely a person can't think for themselves. I must tell them what they should think.
Yeah, and I
You know?
Yeah.
actually posted this from our account on Twitter today. But I mean, that's what
Twitter.
that's what
The
Soviet
wicked
meant.
Twitter.
Soviet meant counsel or news or to inform. Like that, it was a literally a vanguard, a bulwark of against the evil thoughts that come. You see what I'm saying? Like they were the Soviets. They were the council of the revolution. And it's not limited to that line of thought. I mean, that's what the priest class has always been in certain religions and stuff. Like the Gnostic religion. I'm sure Josh could tell more about that. I'm sure you could too. You went to seminary. It's the enlightened. It's the experts. It's the high-minded people. They're the ones the priests of the Temple of Syrinx. So it's not limited to one ideology. It's been throughout all of human history. It's a natural human thing that keeps arising, which you think would prove its own beliefs wrong, that it keeps happening. But it's just such a, I don't know the word. I can hear the word, but anyway, it's a conglomeration of just awfulness that it would deny, that we always deny human nature and then try to supplant it with our own ideas and try to control people that way.
Because it works.
Yeah.
Consistently.
Yeah. I mean, but I'm trying to not be a downer, but shows like The Walking Dead and The Last of Us is always a dystopia where humans are reduced to meat bags. Like they're zombies, or they've been taken by parasites or by aliens. And a lot of that rose in reaction to totalitarian regimes. Like that's where dystopia, the entire genre of dystopia came from, was actually from the USSR idea, but the people saw what happened and they saw communism, and then they were like, oh, people are like zombies, like groupthink. This is what they do, and that's the horror behind it. But now we're promoting it and always showing it to ourselves in our own country, in our own culture. We've accepted that idea that's as a premise rather than what these things turn you into.
Well, man, in some ways, humans are complete meat bags. I mean that in the best possible way,
Yeah.
and so I'll explain what I mean by that. It's just that, in and of ourselves, there's no real inherent goodness in us. We're gonna, spiral out of control if left to our own devices, I guess. There's gonna be anarchy. It's not gonna be great. Well, we all know that. We all know that's part of, our human experience. We've seen that over and over again. But what we're missing, and it's what you guys are really connecting, is that there is an archetype. There's something that we should be looking to, and ultimately it finds its fulfillment in Jesus, the God-man. And if you think about him as a person, his humanity, he's referred to in Scripture, in the Bible, as the second Adam. Well, the first Adam didn't get it right, but Jesus is what humanity should have always been from the beginning. Therefore, we need to look to him if we're going to have anything about us that's worth anything, that's good, that he's the one that keeps us from being complete meatbags. So it's not good to completely degrade human nature to nothing, because then you lose the image of God. But if you don't, balance that with the fact that left to our own devices we will, then you don't have the whole picture. And I think that's where what you're talking about, where these good stories with their archetypes come in, is because it actually helps us transcend that meatbaggedness, like
Well, even
that thing that makes us do that.
Yeah, even Paul said, "Imitate me, as I am an imitator of Christ." And
I'll be right
even I don't know. I know not all of our listeners or viewers are Christian, and that's fine. We're not trying to turn you into one or make you one, but even if you don't subscribe to a certain religious belief or whatever else, I know the Bible certainly has the viewpoint that everything in man's mind is wickedness all the time, but there's nobility in people. There's the capacity for kindness, the capacity for love, and as a Christian, we believe that those, just the general capacity for good and nobility, is also present in people because they are in the image of God, even if it goes unrecognized. But the old analogy of there being two dogs inside, one that's that's good and one that's evil, and the one they're always fighting, and the one that wins is the one you feed the most. I think that rings true regardless of your belief system. Is if you feed the most noble urges, if you feed the desire to help others, to be selfless, to be sacrificial, if you feed the desires to be a trustworthy person, to be a good father, a good husband, a good mother, a good wife, if you feed the ideas of being faithful, of being honest, all these things that even non-believing, non-Christian or non-religious people would, if you ask them to list off what are qualities that you think are ideal qualities, they would list these things. If you feed the good nature, even outside of religion, even outside of Christianity, if you feed the best in people, the best is what grows in people. But we live in a society that feeds the worst in people.
Consistently.
Consistently, day in and day out, everything you see, hear, and consume is feeding the worst in you. It's feeding your paranoia. It's feeding your shame. It's feeding your guilt. It's feeding your greed. It's feeding your lust. It's feeding all of the worst possible impulses that you have. And then you wonder, well, why am I in such a darkened state of mind? Well, I mean, you are what you eat.
Yeah.
It's a good word, man.
And I hate to keep running away as I'm watching the baby, and I have to keep checking on them, and they keep crying and stuff.
Baby.
But anyway, no, I guess this has been rattling in my head for about 10 years. The phrase I got really sick of hearing is like only human, because that's a loaded phrase, and it's an excuse to fall short and do terrible things, and people are supposed to accept it because we came from the millennial generation, which, to my knowledge, was the start of like a lot of subjective excuses for failing and whining, if I can say that, and having no ambition. And it also reduces what a human is. And it says, well, that's all you can be, is whatever that failed thing is. And I just, like I said, it's still a vague thing, which gives me hope that it's still kind of a vague thing. It's not so blatant yet. It's not as blatant as like crap of the Grammys, but this idea, and I don't know what else to call it other than an anti-human idea, and maybe not. It may not be the philosophical idea of anti-humanism,
in the traditional sense,
or post-humanism, but it is a destruction of what a human can be, of the human spirit and human ideals, and the only, I don't know. You think of something like Game of Thrones, where everyone's awful because they live in an awful world, and it's like, well, man, that world's actually not that different from Middle Earth. Like there are,
or just medieval England.
Yeah, and like in Middle Earth in general, which I'll give George R.R. Martin some credit. Like he's a really good writer, particularly of dialogue. So we'll go there. You can enjoy the story because it's well written. Anyway, it's the excuse for all this bad behavior. But it's like, man, in Middle Earth, literally, like the son of Satan, Sauron, exists in a physical state and has his own country. Like it's not just an abstract evil influencing people. It's like this literal thing that at one point walked the earth until it lost its body, but it still kind of exists, and its forces are there. And the people of Middle Earth are still encouraged and told, like, hey, don't give up. Don't succumb to darkness.
No nihilism.
Yeah, and the whole point is like there's literally a physical embodiment of evil that's tempting everyone. And it's just so much. The story is so much bigger than even people like that I hear on YouTube or hear like college professors talk about. It's literally one of the biggest challenges to the human spirit ever written. It's to say, even if evil, a physical object exists that tempts you with your greatest temptation, greater than any computer ever could, you still need to transcend it. And you need to do it. And you can. And that will make you cry.
Yeah.
Like thinking about,
Yeah. I can't think of a better depiction of like the human life and the struggle of the human life than I can of like, the juxtaposition of Gollum with, Frodo and Sam.
Mm-hmm.
Because, what's the difference? Gollum is this twisted creature that is given into his basest urges, and he's twisted by this ring, this power, this evil, and ultimately he becomes twisted by his own greed and his own desire for power and passion for the ring. And it kills him.
Yeah.
It destroys him completely. But then you have that against, Frodo and Sam, which I think shows a really good picture of like what the human life is like. Hey, we're struggling together against this evil thing, and it's trying to destroy us, and it's everything seems the odds seem stacked against us, and at the very last moment, what happens? They win.
Mm-hmm.
The good side wins because that's reality. That's what actually happens.
Yeah.
Well, and
And so,
every time that someone like Boromir falls to temptation, it's always Boromir, Gollum, all these characters. They're always portrayed as an absolute tragedy
Mm-hmm.
because they could have been stronger.
I love that.
There's
They could
no
have been stronger.
the great brilliance of Tolkien is there's no negative or dark catharsis. There's no one doing something you wish you could do, but you'd get arrested for it. It is always a positive catharsis. It's always, this is just and good that this happened, not I'm really glad that happened because I wish I could do that. And that's
Wow.
that's on a whole other level of writing. Like, that's crazy. You know what I mean? Like, and
even
understanding of the
there's-
human spirit.
There's so many beautiful moments when it's honest. Tolkien's honest with his characters. Instead of making them perfect heroes, you have moments where, Frodo's like, man, I wish somebody killed Gollum. I wish
Yeah.
Bilbo killed him.
Yep.
And the response to that from Gandalf is it's so convicting because, like, who are you to decide?
Well, the word you just
Oh.
said, man, conviction.
So good.
It's convicting.
Yeah. Who
You'll
are you to
barely
decide?
you'll barely hear that term even in Christian circles now. You won't
Yeah.
hear it at all outside of that. This idea that, like
Yeah.
you said, like the ideal is here and you are convicted because you don't live up to it.
Yeah. And just the honesty of being able to have a hero in a story say, I wish this had never come to me. And, then to be told, like, yeah, well, so does everybody who has to live to fight, through these kinds of times.
No one wants this.
Everybody, look at Jesus laying down on his face in the garden, weeping and praying out to God that let this cup pass from me, but he still drank the cup, and that's what real heroism is. It's not saying I'm so strong that I'm not scared, or I'm so valiant, I'm so noble that it doesn't cross my mind to wish the wrong thing. It's having that thought hit you and then leaving it behind and walking ahead in the right direction anyway.
And it's the difference between, and I don't there's got to be someone that studied like the etymology and history of this kind of divide of characters who conquer evil with good and those who either out evil or outsmart evil. They're more clever. And we get so much more of the alternate now of real politic of well, you're just not playing the game well enough. And some of that's with the rise of like geek culture and nerd culture of it doesn't matter so long as you out clever somebody, which is more of the Tony Stark kind of thing, which they actually did well in the Avengers, where Captain America said, "You're not the kind of guy that'll jump on a grenade. Like you won't make that kind of sacrifice," and he finally does, but that's a whole other thing. But Tolkien, it's always this idea of you outgood the bad guy. And the one time that we see kind of the cleverness and deception, really, it's Bilbo getting the ring from Gollum. And part of that is, that's kind of one of those questions, like, well, was it good that he even got the ring? Or is that part of the ring's deception? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't say that's a good thing that he did that and that happened. It doesn't. It doesn't praise him for
it. With that, that was his first encounter with that temptation, and it's also made clear in Lord of the Rings that the ring chooses who it's going to tempt.
Mm-hmm.
It abandoned Gollum on purpose. It chose Bilbo on purpose.
Yeah.
Bilbo was weak
Yep.
and would have continued. It couldn't stay with him. And I always loved how one of the strongest things that I always loved about Gandalf as a character, because he acts almost as a Jesus allegory in that story, particularly in the death and rebirth and
Mm-hmm.
going from the gray to the white and all of that stuff. But in spite of all his wisdom and all of his power and all of his kindness and virtue, when he's offered the ring, he says, no,
Mm-hmm.
don't give it to me. Don't put me in that. He flees temptation.
Yep.
And, anymore, the idea of fleeing temptation is never, you don't see heroes do that. They always say, I'm going to use the villain's power against him.
Yep.
So, like, for example, right now, I'm a PS Plus member on PS. I have PS4. I can't afford PS5 if I could find one. But the free game this month is the DLC called Beyond Light for Destiny 2. And like I've only played like the first hour of it, but that's the entire plot. Is like there's this hideous evil power of darkness that is spreading through a race of aliens and giving them power. And of course, your character, your guardian character, has to go beyond the light and take up the power of this darkness and use it against the darkness. When has that ever worked?
Mm-hmm.
Like, when has it ever been a positive idea to say, you know what, the best way to beat these Nazis is if we are really better at killing Jews than they are?
Yeah, that's politics. What you described, the power game of once we have it, we'll do it better.
Yeah, if they stole the election, we'll figure out a better way to steal the election.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. There's no nobility, and people don't value nobility anymore on a wide scale. But I think that as individuals, the people we respect the most are the people that we see integrity in.
Man, I was just thinking about that today actually, and like I haven't fully formed the thought, but I'd like to discuss it with you guys in conjunction with all of this. Is respect only comes like the defining quality of someone you respect is that they challenge you to be better. Like, that's the only kind of respect you have, is in some way, even if it's a physical conflict type thing, it's that this person can hurt me more, so I need to be physically better.
Yeah.
That's where respect comes from. It has to be that something about this person challenges me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We respect integrity. And, integrity is another word that we don't hear much anymore, but I mean, it's really an architectural term. It's a structural term of saying how much force can this structure suffer under, like how much force can be placed on this, how much weight before it crumbles. Well, that's its integrity.
And the reason it's not appreciated is because it requires order and hierarchy.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we don't like those things anymore. So, not to... I'm sorry I've had to run away so much because I thought I was going to have help with the baby.
Take care of that baby.
No, I don't have to go right now. I was trying to get us back on topic. I just feel like I've got a hole in my brain because I missed half of like what Steven said. But I think to go back to what really kicked it off for me was like that scene with Theoden and the consistent theme of Gandalf reminding kings that they're men and reminding men that they're kings. And we get two examples of it. We get Theoden, who rises to it, and then we get the steward, whose name I always forget, who doesn't, who crumbles.
What I think is really interesting about Gandalf too in that is that he comes from the outside. In the Legendarium, he's one of the Istari. He comes from the Valar basically, and he's sent there for a specific purpose and a mission. And it's like these characters are struggling with all of these things you're talking about, but they need some type of like outside catalyst to like get things going in the right direction. And I think that mirrors reality as well. It's like we need someone outside of us to tell us that we're marching off a cliff, that
Mhm.
we need to be better. We need to rise to the challenge. We need to be noble. We need to value these things. We need to think about good and, like you're saying, fight good. Uh, fight evil with good instead of
Mm-hmm.
hiding it or doing it some other way. And so, like Gandalf is that picture of, in some ways, God coming to us and extending a hand to us and saying, "Hey, you want to be a real human? You want to realize what life really is?
Mm-hmm.
I'm reaching out to you. I'm showing you what it means, and I'm going to help you do it."
No,
Well, and
and that's that.
he casts out worm tongue like a
Mm-hmm.
demon.
Yeah,
Like he
Oh
casts
yeah,
out that voice.
like poison from a wound or whatever he says. Yeah.
Yeah,
dude,
he
there was
cast that evil voice out because there was no way that Theoden was going to become anything like the king he used to be and was capable of being as long as that voice was in his ear.
Yeah. Well, and what you just said,
good.
Stephen, was like a better, longer description of what I was trying to summarize earlier with the idea of anti-humanism from the actual philosophy, but into reality of what it actually means instead of what people say it means. And it's that the agreement that man can't do it himself, but the idea that there is no God, so that we have to do it and we have to tell humanity what to be. That's what
Yeah.
it is, and that is what we are seeing so much of in everything. It's consistent lecturing, consistent belittling, consistent degradation. It's like our society has become like a giant scolding mother or wife for everybody in it, and it's that's the only image I can think of. It's like in every comic you pick up, in every movie you see, in every book you see, and I'm sure it's not 100% every, but you know what I mean with hyperbole. It's saying there's nothing else.
Virtue signaling.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
appealing to it. That's saying, look at me, notice me, mom. You know, it's
Yeah.
Well,
it's
you're certainly not going to get any help. You're going to get the lecture,
mm-hmm.
and you're going to get that feeling of guilt that is placed upon you, but you're not going to get any help from the other side.
Nope.
That's going to like come, that extends a hand and says, "Hey, I'm going to walk with you in overcoming this thing that I think is evil in you." And it's like just the opposite. Like Gandalf, that's what he's doing for the forces of good. He's walking alongside, and he's not leaving them to their own devices. He's saying, not only am I going to help you
Mm-hmm.
attain to the ultimate good, but I'm going to walk beside you doing it. And so what the opposite says when they, anyway, I'll shut up about that.
No, you're 100%
Well, no,
correct,
but I
because
mean,
that's the
Yeah.
whole thing, is like the term "do the work" that came out in the past 4 years of like woke crap. People saying "do the work." That comes from like Chinese brainwashing, when they would literally like say that stuff, like "do the research, do your homework, do your homework." Which what they meant by that was read like Mao's book and read the people's point of view. You have to do this. Like, we hate you, we're belittling you, and you have to do better, and you're the only one that can improve it.
Well, it says you're a piece of crap.
Mm-hmm.
For lack of a better way to say it, you're a piece of crap, and you're never going to change, and you can't get out of that. There's no way. You are this way all the time. I'm going to belittle you, and I'm going to turn you into less than human with
Mm-hmm.
with my belittling of you,
Yeah.
and that's what happens over and over and over and over again. And that, I know that's a wider discussion than what we're
Yeah.
talking about now, but I uh,
but abuse
I'm
is
not going to say that
powerful.
now. I'll say this offline. The spirit got
Abuse
me.
is powerful.
If it's got
And
you,
when you
man, go
look,
with it.
yeah,
Well, I mean, we've talked about this before. I'll say this in a nice way. Um, the we're white middle-aged men. I mean, we're the scum of the earth right now.
oh
I
yeah,
mean,
we're the worst.
we're absolutely the worst on the planet. We're not being by our society called to live and be noble or do any of those things because that's not necessary. We're already trash.
Mm-hmm.
There's no coming back from it. And so that's like the message that I'm constantly getting. And here I am. I'm trying to raise my family and just keep my head down and do the right thing. But, I'm being attacked just for being who I am. And I'm like, that's not fair. But
No,
life isn't
well, you're
fair. And I'm I get that, but it's extremely frustrating.
Society wants you to fall on your sword.
Mm-hmm.
Society wants you to give up and just surrender any strength that you had. But deep down, what people really want is to see someone that they can believe in.
Yeah, well, look at Wormtongue. Like Wormtongue's whole thing was it degraded Theoden, and it destroyed him. And because it destroyed him, it destroyed his kingdom. And why? So this other wizard could come in and take his stuff. Could come in and destroy it. You're attacked by people who want to take what Josh was saying. They want what you have, and everyone has that pettiness in them because they don't meet the ideal. That wasn't Saruman's land. In fact, Saruman wasn't supposed to have anything. He wasn't supposed to have any land or property or any possessions. Really, none of the wizards were, which is why Gandalf and Radagast lived like hobos, basically.
Well, see, and you got to the heart of it, and I'm glad we ended up at that point because this is really important. The problem appears to be Wormtongue, but Wormtongue is just a voice for a greater evil behind it.
And then another one behind it, and then another one. It keeps going.
Another one behind that. It's that idea, again, if we want to use scripture, it's the idea of, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities and all this. When you look at the narratives that we're being fed, and it's easy to focus on the face of those ideas and say, well, this person is such an enemy or this person is this. There's always more people behind that person.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the head. That's just the figurehead. That's just the mouthpiece. And what you really have to ask yourself with all of these things they push, with all these movements that they push, who stands to gain from you believing this? Who's going to get money from you believing that you need to shelter in place, put a mask on, and not leave your home and not work and not? Who's benefiting from it?
Yeah.
Who's benefiting from it when you say, yeah, I think that that all of this group of people are evil and wrong and they need to be completely shut down and canceled. Nobody should be able, all these, whatever it is, it's always going to come down to who's making money off of this, who's gaining ground, whether territory, politically, financially, whatever it looks like. Who is the real power behind the voice? Because there's Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and every other thing has plenty of Wormtongues, but what's the tower that's behind that Wormtongue? Who's he going back to?
Yeah. Well, if you think about it too, in that scenario, the person that's being used is having the human spirit inside of them degraded.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're being used. You're a pawn in a scheme, and it destroys your humanity.
Oh yeah, but then how was it conquered? At least in the movie, like I said, the line that really, I mean, of course, Gandalf does an outside force, but he makes the point, take up your sword. That will restore your strength.
Yeah.
And and if you want to take that multiple literary, metaphorical, or in a Christian view, the sword is truth. And in a Christian sense, a sword always represents truth.
And reject that voice, pick up truth,
mm-hmm.
hold on
and
to
use it.
Yeah, use it.
We forget often, and we don't forget. You guys don't forget, but many people forget how important words are. Wormtongue is using his words to manipulate and to cast a spell in some ways on Theoden.
Mm-hmm.
And words are so powerful. And when you said the sword, it just reminded me just the opposite of that. It's like, oh, the words of God, like his voice, him speaking is what it's going to take to overcome this. And so we can't forget how powerful these words are. They have the power to give life and to take life away.
Yeah, and with that, that's what Theoden had to do, and he had to go and then undo all the damage that was done when he was trapped in lies. Like he had let Oryx take his countryside and destroy his nation, destroy his land, but that's what happens when you find truth. You then have to go use it to fix everything that has been broken from lies.
It's almost as if the truth had set him free.
Exactly. Yeah. But that, like I said, I'm so sorry that it's vague. It's just, you get ideas and you want to talk about them, but I love that we can do this because the internet has convinced people that they have to have everything 100% formed out and come out and say it. And as we've seen, you can be an extremely intelligent person who says something perfectly articulate, and no one will care. Or they'll push back and still say, no, that's not true. So I don't feel bad coming in with something to discuss because I think that's what people need. And I think that's what we all need to do is be able to even fail verbally in pursuit of truth. You see what I'm saying?
Forward.
Yeah, to fail forward. It's just there's a hole in our culture and art in particular, and I think what it is, it all connects together. I think people are surrounded in lies and in falsehood and just artificiality, and we have writers today that have never really met another person. They don't even know how to write a person, a human being. And that's sad.
You guys are on a noble course because you're trying to change that. It's the good ideas are going to rise to the surface. I really believe that. I think the good stories, the good art is going to rise to the surface. So I appreciate what you guys are doing.
No, man, we appreciate you.
Appreciate that.
I will say this too. This format, us talking it out is also something I hope is encouraging to the listeners too. If somebody's listening in, you should have these discussions about ultimate things. I mean, your life matters and you only have so much time to live, so you might as well live for something that means something. So this is how you figure that out. You talk about it. You have a discussion. And when you disagree with somebody, you still have a discussion about it.
Yeah.
We can't talk anymore, and I love that we're doing this.
Well, see, and I know that it's certainly people might sit back and say, well, all three of these guys kind of have the same worldview, so of course they agree with each other. And it looks like a little echo chamber, but the reality is if you see this stuff differently and you want to engage in a conversation with us, we will happily have you on this show. We would hope that everybody would be respectful to one another, but I know, I have no problem with anybody that wants to debate these ideas joining us in this conversations. That's how we learn from each other. That's the best thing we can do is talk.
Yeah, that's how you pursue truth. And that's why censorship is always part of it, because they know anyone who wants to be a totalitarian, I don't think it's one group of people. I don't think the Jews are controlling the world. I have to say that because we're on YouTube. I don't think there's one group of people controlling things. I think totalitarian ideas go everywhere in every culture throughout all of history, no matter what race, creed, or whatever you are. So, coming back to reality, because we have to say that, censorship is always the tool of the totalitarian because they know that people think by discussing things. And but look at Twitter. It's been and the internet, like, one of the best psyops in history has been to criticize people for saying something that isn't 100% correct or can't be rationally debated. And I agree, you need rational debate, but some things aren't, like poetry, like prophecy, whether you believe that prophecy is a real thing, physical thing or not, or just an accumulation of patterns that are observed in a guesstimation. We've become rationality and scientism have become bludgeons against human nature, going back to all of this. And Lewis wrote about this stuff in That Hideous Strength, and Abolition of Man. That what it comes down to is a materialist worldview, and that's not working, man. Like complete logic, complete rationality, it's not working. There must be a spiritual element. There must be an artistic element, and I think that's why artists fail too. Is artists fail because they're afraid to fail. You see what I'm saying? They're afraid
Yeah.
to speak and talk and discuss and work publicly, and that's how you figure things out. That's how. And I don't know. I know what I'm saying. It's just I think you should just not be afraid of what people think.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to be wrong about something
Yeah.
either. I mean, there are so many. I have my defenses up sometimes, like when I'm talking with someone that I might disagree with. But having that discussion either will solidify me in my position, or it will help me to think of things from a different perspective, and I'll have
Yeah.
a better way to defend either what I believe in firmly, or I actually might, God forbid, actually change my views on something
Mm-hmm.
to be
Yeah.
what's true. Because I think that when you have these types of discourses and you really are being honest about it, you find your way to what is true.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think that's something that historically Christians have been bad at, is having conversations. If you think about like a big circle, this big huge circle, and the very center is the absolute truth. All right, I might be coming at the truth from this direction and be kind of close to it, and you might be coming at the truth from another direction, and maybe you might even be closer to it than I am. But because I'm over here, it looks like you're really far off. So I want you to get around here and see it the way I see it, instead of appreciating that maybe you're closer to the truth than I am.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And maybe I can learn from you instead of wanting you to come around here and see it exactly the way I see it.
But
Maybe.
but in like we've been discussing, like the problem with our world is when you remove that center and say there is no truth.
Yeah,
And what happens?
then we're just all
Yeah.
stumbling around.
But then people are still judging others, saying you're wrong, you're away from the truth. It's like because they've created their own center, and that's a whole other philosophical thing. Because that's what like
Yeah,
postmodernism and neo-Marxism was about, was literally trying to recenter the center. That's an actual
Yeah.
idea that they talked about, was
Yeah.
get rid of the center, put in a new center. So you
Yeah.
saying that is actually really prolific with all of this.
I think that if you can't have something to sort of base what you're talking about on, you're just talking gobbledygook. And in that situation, and in that situation alone, I would say maybe we should just go play football or something instead of talk, because we're not gonna get anywhere helpful.
I'm not playing football
know,
with
it-
you, Steven.
Yeah.
You are considerably stronger than me.
He says, "How about some Smash Brothers?"
Yeah, I'll play Smash Brothers.
Oh, you would probably kill me at Smash Brothers.
Probably.
But not Mario Kart. Not Mario Kart right now.
I've got 64 lined up right here. We can play whenever we finish
Oh my goodness.
whenever we do the Pentecost recordings. We can play some Mario Kart.
Oh man, do you have James Bond Goldeneye?
Oh yeah, I've got it right now. I just
007?
played with my friend Colin the other week when he was up here.
The original multiplayer game.
It was a great one, man.
Oh yeah, it still lives up
It
to
really
it.
was.
So good.
But I don't want to keep you guys. I could have another 4-hour discussion like this. But I love that we were able to take something like an obscure concept that none of us really wanted to be able to point out. And thank God we can't. Because if you could, it's probably too late by the time that the spirit becomes a physical being and is attacking you. But I think this is how you fight it off. I think by recognizing it, pointing it out, and talking about it, even if you're talking as obscurely as it's forming, but then you get more concrete about it,
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, just a reminder, and we do this every episode, but if you haven't done it yet, like and subscribe. It helps us get in more people's ears. So just like and subscribe. Share the videos on social media. We got shorter clips that you can share from each episode. We're just trying to build a platform here to discuss all this stuff, to create cool things, to include as many people as possible in these discussions. If there's a topic you would like us to approach, let us know. If you want to be a part of one of these discussions, man, we'd love to have anybody jump in and join us in some of this stuff. So please interact with us, and again, like and subscribe.
Yeah, and a lot of these themes are in our books, like Apollyon 20XX that's coming in May, and all of them, because this is the great Leviathan of our time. is purpose, is purpose, meaning, and truth. So,
Yeah.
Stephen, thanks for coming on, buddy. I look forward to talking to you again. I'm gonna end the recording and holler at you guys real quick.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. It was a blast as always.